I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by fairy lights and the hum of excited voices. The engagement party was in full swing. My fiancé, Lachlan, looked charming as ever. Beside him stood Elowen, my best friend, laughing with him like they belonged in a magazine. But I knew something no one else did. My heart pounded, not from joy but the weight of the secret I'd carried for weeks. Tonight wasn't just a celebration. It was a setup. 3 months ago, I started noticing changes in Lachlan. He became protective of his phone, always turning the screen away. At first, I thought it was just stress. His firm had landed a major client, and the long hours made sense. But then came the lies. When I checked with his colleague Theo about drinks, Theo said they hadn't seen him in weeks. My stomach twisted, but I held on to faith. Lachlan had always been loyal, or so I thought. He proposed 6 months ago on a quiet beach at sunset. The ring sparkled like the stars above, and I'd said yes without hesitation. When doubts crept in, I turned to Elowen, my best friend since college. We met in a literature class and were inseparable ever since. She was the sister I never had. I told her everything, how Lachlan had been acting strange. Elowen listened with hazel eyes full of concern. "He's probably planning a surprise," she said over coffee. "You know how Lachlan is." I wanted to believe her. I did believe her, but then came the first clue. That day changed everything I thought I knew. I came home early from work and found his laptop open on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping, not really. My laptop was dead, and I needed to check an urgent email. When I opened his, a messaging app popped up. The name Ellie stood out immediately. My breath caught. Ellie was Ellen's nickname, used only by her closest friends. The messages weren't friendly, they were intimate. "Last night was incredible," she wrote. Lachlan's reply, "You're all I think about." I stared at the screen, heart racing, hands shaking. My world cracked open. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. But as I thought about it, things added up. The late nights, the way Elowen always knew where Lachlan was, their glances at dinner. So I started gathering proof. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. I needed to be absolutely sure. I logged into Lachlan's cloud using an old password he once shared. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Photos of them together, nothing explicit, but intimate enough. Her hand on his arm, his lips on her cheek. Emails sent through a shared account. Every click was a knife to my heart. Still, I kept going. I wasn't ready to scream or cry. I was preparing for something much bigger. I could have confronted them in private, but it didn't feel right. They betrayed me publicly, laughing and lying in front of everyone. They didn't deserve quiet closure, they deserved to be exposed. The engagement party was already booked at a beautiful venue. It was meant to celebrate love, but I turned it into something else. I compiled screenshots, photos, and timelines, all on a USB drive. That night, I wore a sleek navy dress, one Lachlan adored. My hair was pinned back tight, my smile practiced. Elowen arrived early, helping with decorations as if nothing was wrong. "You look stunning, Soph," she said. Her perfume turned my stomach. Lachlan worked the room, laughing easily, fooling everyone, but I noticed every glance between them. They thought they were hiding it well. The venue sparkled. High ceilings, chandeliers, laughter. My parents were glowing with pride. Lachlan's sister told childhood stories while Elowen's brother flirted at the bar. It was perfect, or it should have been. I waited until the room was full, the energy peaking. The slideshow was scheduled post-dinner, a sweet recap of our relationship. But I had swapped it for something else. I stood at the front of the room, microphone in hand. My voice was steady, though my fingers trembled. "Thank you all for being here," I said, scanning the room. Lachlan stood beside me, arm at my waist, unaware. Elowen, drink in hand, watched from across the room. "Tonight is about love," I said, "but also about truth." I nodded to my coworker manning the projector. The screen lit up. The first image wasn't of me and Lachlan. It was a screenshot, one of their messages, blown up for all to see. Gasps echoed. Lachlan's hand fell from my waist. Elowen dropped her glass. More messages followed. Her words, "Last night was incredible." His reply, "You're all I think about." Then the photos, her hand on his arm, his kiss on her cheek. No one spoke. You could hear a pin drop. I didn't look at them. I kept my focus on the crowd. These are the people I trusted most, I said. My fiancé, my best friend. They've been lying to me and to all of you. I clicked through the rest, emails, photos, and finally the timeline of their meetups. Dates that overlapped with our anniversary, lies layered on lies. The whispers turned into gasps, then chaos. Lachlan lunged, trying to grab the remote, but I stepped back. "Sophia, stop this," he hissed, eyes wide with panic. I ignored him. The slide said more than I ever could. Elowen sobbed into her hands. Her brother looked at her, stunned. My mother stood frozen. Lachlan's parents stared at him like they didn't know him. And me, I felt calm, lighter. I had taken back my power. The room was a blur of faces, each one a mix of shock, pity, and anger, as the slideshow burned their betrayal into everyone's minds. Lachlan stood frozen near me, his face drained of color, his eyes darting between the screen and the crowd, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Elowen was by the bar, her hands shielding her face, but I could see her trembling, her auburn curls falling messily over her shoulders. Her brother Torrens stood beside her, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might break a tooth, his eyes flickering with confusion and rage. The engagement party, meant to be a celebration of love, had become a stage for truth, and I was the one holding the spotlight. My heart pounded, but my resolve was ironclad. I'd spent weeks planning this, gathering every piece of evidence, and I wasn't about to let them slip away without facing the full weight of their actions. Lachlan took a hesitant step toward me, his voice low and desperate. "Sophia, please, can we talk about this somewhere else?" His words were nearly swallowed by the growing hum of the crowd, a mix of whispers and sharp exclamations. I could see the panic in his eyes, the way his hands twitched at his sides, but I felt no sympathy. He'd had months to confess, to choose me over her, and he'd chosen lies instead. I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the sea of guests. "No, Lachlan," I said, my voice carrying over the noise. "You don't get to decide how this goes anymore." I clicked the remote, and the next slide appeared, a screenshot of an email from their secret account. Elowen's words glowed on the screen. "I hate lying to her, but I can't stop seeing you." Lachlan's reply was worse. "We'll figure it out, Ellie. I just need you." The crowd gasped, some leaning forward to read every word, others turning to their neighbors with wide eyes. I faced Lachlan, meeting his gaze for the first time since the slideshow began. His eyes were wide, pleading, but beneath the desperation I saw guilt, raw and unmistakable. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The room was watching, waiting, the air thick with anticipation. Elowen's voice broke through, small and shaky from across the room. "Sophia, I'm so sorry," she said, stepping forward, her mascara streaking down her face like black rivers. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed in the quiet. "Like this?" I repeated, my voice cutting through the tension. "You mean you didn't plan for me to find out? You thought you could keep sneaking around, pretending to be my best friend while sleeping with my fiancé?" The words poured out, each one a release of the pain I'd carried for weeks. The crowd was restless now, their whispers turning into a low roar. My coworker Lila, never one to hold back, shouted from the middle of the room, "You two are disgusting." A few people nodded, their murmurs growing louder, more hostile. Lachlan flinched, his shoulders hunching like he could shrink away from the judgment. Elowen's brother Torren grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the bar. "Elowen, what the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice booming. She shook her head, sobbing harder, but didn't answer. I didn't care about her tears. She'd played the perfect friend for months, helping me choose flowers for this party, gushing over my engagement ring, all while carrying on with Lachlan behind my back. Her apologies meant nothing now. I clicked to the next slide, a timeline I'd meticulously pieced together, detailing every meetup I'd uncovered. Dates, times, locations, each one a stab to my heart. Some were places we'd all been together, like the diner where we'd shared milkshakes, or the park where we'd had lazy Sunday picnics. The last entry was from 3 days ago, a text from Lachlan to Elowen. "Meet me at the hotel after Sophia's work event. She won't suspect a thing." I'd been at a networking dinner that night, laughing with colleagues while they were together, thinking they'd gotten away with it. The memory made my chest tighten, but I pushed through, letting the slide speak for itself. The crowd's reaction was immediate. More gasps, a few muttered curses, and the sound of my mother's soft sob from the back of the room. Lachlan's mother, Clara, stood up from her table, her face ashen. "Lachlan, is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer, just stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Clara turned to me, tears in her eyes. "Sophia, I had no idea," she said. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, my throat tight. I hadn't wanted to hurt her or anyone else, but the truth needed to be told. My parents were still in the back, my mother crying into my father's shoulder. He looked at me with a mix of pride and pain, like he admired my courage, but hated that I'd had to use it. I wanted to run to them, to feel their arms around me, but I wasn't finished. There was more to say, more to show. I picked up the microphone again, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "I trusted them both," I said, addressing the room. Lachlan was supposed to be my partner, my future. Elowen was my best friend, the person I turned to when things got hard. But they chose each other over me, over everything we'd built. I'm not here to beg for answers or apologies. I'm here to show you who they really are. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent again, every eye on me. I felt raw, exposed, but also free. For weeks I'd carried this secret alone, letting it gnaw at me. Now it was out, and they were the ones who had to face the fallout. Lachlan tried again, his voice hoarse. "Sophia, I love you. This was a mistake. I swear." The words hit me like a punch, not because they hurt, but because they were so hollow. A mistake? Months of lies, of secret meetings, of laughing behind my back. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice, repeated over and over. I didn't respond, just stared at him, letting his words hang in the air. The crowd was turning on him now, their murmurs growing sharper, more accusing. Elowen spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Sophia, please, I never meant to hurt you." But Torrin cut her off, pulling her toward the exit. "Enough," he said, his voice low and angry. "You've done enough damage." She didn't resist, her head down as they slipped through the side door, her sobs echoing faintly. The party was falling apart. Some guests started to leave, casting sympathetic glances my way as they grabbed their coats. Others stayed, talking in small groups, their voices a mix of shock and gossip. Lila approached me, her eyes blazing. "You're a badass, Sophia," she said, squeezing my arm. I'd have just decked them both. I managed a small smile, grateful for her support, but I felt empty inside. I'd done what I set out to do, but it didn't erase the betrayal. Lachlan was still standing there, looking lost, like a child caught in a lie. His sister Maris walked up to him, her face hard. "You're an idiot," she said, her voice carrying. "You had everything, and you threw it away." She turned to me, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. You didn't deserve this." I nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the slideshow was fading, leaving me shaky and drained. I looked around the room, at the half-eaten plates of food, the spilled wine where Elowen's glass had shattered, the fairy lights that now seemed too bright for the wreckage of the night. My parents finally reached me, my mother pulling me into a tight hug. "You're so strong," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. My father put his hand on my shoulder, his presence steady. I leaned into them, grateful for their love. But the weight of the betrayal was still there, heavy and unrelenting. I thought back to the weeks leading up to this moment, how I'd agonized over every detail. After finding the messages on Lachlan's laptop, I'd spent days in a fog, barely eating, barely sleeping. I'd gone through his cloud account, finding more photos, more emails, each one a new wound. There was one email that stuck with me, from Elowen to Lachlan, sent just a week after he proposed to me. "I know you're engaged, but I can't let you go," she'd written. His reply had been short. "I don't want you to." Reading that had broken something in me, but it also lit a fire. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I started planning, collecting every piece of evidence, building my case like a lawyer preparing for trial. I'd even gone to the hotel mentioned in their texts, asking the front desk if they'd seen Lachlan or Elowen. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, had confirmed they'd checked in together, using a fake name. That was the moment I knew I couldn't confront them privately. They didn't deserve that courtesy. The venue was stunning before it all fell apart, with its high ceilings and chandeliers, casting a warm glow over the tables. I'd spent weeks choosing the menu, the music, the decorations, wanting everything to be perfect. Ella had been there for all of it, helping me pick out the navy tablecloths, suggesting the playlist, even offering to make the centerpieces herself. I thought she was being a good friend, but now I saw it for what it was, guilt, or maybe a way to stay close to Lachlan. Lachlan had been just as involved, charming everyone with his ideas for the party, acting like the perfect fiancé. I remembered how he'd kissed me the morning of the event, telling me he couldn't wait to marry me. The memory made my stomach churn now, knowing he'd probably been texting Elowen minutes later. As the slideshow ended, I felt the room shift. People were looking at me differently, not just with pity, but with respect. My friend Jasper, who'd known Lachlan since college, came up to me, his face grim. "I always thought he was a good guy," he said. "I was wrong. You did the right thing, Sophia." I nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a chapter I'd loved, one I'd poured my heart into. Lachlan tried to approach me again, but my father stepped in front of him. His voice calm but firm. "You've done enough," he said. "Leave her alone." Lachlan hesitated, then nodded, grabbing his jacket from a chair and heading for the exit. He didn't look back, and I didn't want him to. The venue staff moved quietly, cleaning up the mess as if nothing had happened. They swept up the broken glass from Elowen's wine, cleared the tables and dimmed the lights. I stood with my parents, letting their warmth ground me. Leila and a few other friends stayed close, offering words of support, but I could barely hear them. My mind was replaying the night, the slides, the gasps, the looks on Lachlan's and Elowen's faces. I'd exposed them, just as I'd planned. But the pain was still there, sharp and unrelenting. I thought about the future, about the apartment I shared with Lachlan, the wedding we'd been planning, the life I'd imagined with him. It was all gone now, replaced by a void I didn't know how to fill. I wondered what Lachlan and Elowen were doing now. Were they together, consoling each other, or had their betrayal driven a wedge between them two? I didn't care. Not really, but the thought lingered. Elowen's tears hadn't seemed fake, but I couldn't trust anything about her anymore. Lachlan's apologies had been empty, a last-ditch effort to save face. I looked at the ring on my finger, the one he'd given me on that beach at sunset. It felt heavy, like a lie I'd been carrying. I slipped it off, tucking it into my pocket. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but I knew I couldn't wear it anymore. The night dragged on, the crowd thinning as people said their goodbyes. Some hugged me, others just nodded, unsure what to say. I didn't blame them. What do you say to someone who's just exposed their fiancé and best friend in front of everyone? My parents stayed by my side, my mother's hand in mine. My father's steady presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. But I felt alone, in a way I couldn't explain. The people I'd trusted most had betrayed me, and now I had to figure out who I was without them. The party was over, but the real work was just beginning, rebuilding my life, piece by piece without the two people who'd been my foundation. The venue was almost deserted now, the once lively party reduced to a scattering of abandoned wine glasses, crumpled napkins and half-eaten plates of food. The fairy lights still twinkled along the walls, their soft glow a cruel reminder of the joy this night was supposed to hold. My parents stood close, my mother's hand clutching mine, her eyes swollen from crying. My father's face was a mask of quiet strength, but I could see the anger in the tight set of his jaw, the way his gaze kept flickering toward the door Lachlan and Elowen had fled through. A few loyal friends, Lila, Jasper, and my coworker Nora, lingered nearby, their presence a small comfort in the wake of the chaos. I'd done what I set out to do, expose Lachlan and Elowen's betrayal in front of everyone, but the weight of it settled over me like a fog. The life I'd planned, the future I'd built in my mind, was gone, and I was left standing in the ruins, trying to piece together what came next. I walked to the bar, needing a moment to catch my breath. The bartender, a young guy named Milo with kind eyes, slid a glass of water across the counter without a word. I nodded my thanks, my throat too tight to speak. I leaned against the bar, staring at the shards of Elowen's broken wine glass, still scattered on the floor despite the staff's efforts to clean up. It felt like a symbol of everything. My trust, my love, my belief in the people I'd held closest, all shattered in a single night. I replayed the moment I decided to expose them, sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the USB drive that held every damning piece of evidence. I'd imagined their faces when the truth came out, pictured the shock and shame, but I hadn't anticipated how heavy it would feel to actually do it, to stand in front of everyone and tear my world apart. Lila joined me at the bar, her usual fiery energy softened by concern. "You okay, Soph?" she asked, resting a hand on my shoulder. I shook my head, unable to lie. The truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever be okay again. She didn't push, just stood there, her presence steady and grounding. Jasper came over too, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his face still etched with disbelief. "I can't wrap my head around this," he said quietly. "I've known Lachlan since we were kids. I thought he was one of the good ones." His words hit hard, echoing my own thoughts. Lachlan had been my anchor, the man who'd made me laugh on my worst days, who'd promised me a future with a ring and a smile. Elowen had been my rock, the friend who'd seen me through heartbreak and triumphs. How had I been so blind to who they really were? I thought back to the weeks leading up to this night, how I'd turned into a detective in my own life. After finding the messages on Lachlan's laptop, I couldn't stop digging. I'd hacked into their shared email account, guessing the password based on Elowen's old college nickname. The emails were a punch to the gut. Plans for secret meetups, coded references to our spot and when she's not around. I'd cross-referenced dates with Lachlan's calendar, realizing his client meetings and late nights at the office were lies. I'd even gone to the hotel they mentioned, a boutique place downtown with sleek decor and a discreet staff. I'd sweet-talked the clerk, a young woman named Mia, into confirming they'd checked in together under a fake name. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but I kept going, driven by a mix of anger and a desperate need for proof. I didn't just want to confront them, I wanted to make sure they couldn't lie their way out of it. The slideshow had been my weapon, carefully crafted to hit them where it hurt most. Their reputations, their place in the lives of everyone in that room. I'd spent hours choosing which messages to include, which photos would tell the story without needing explanation. There was one photo that haunted me, taken at a bar I didn't recognize. Elowen's hand resting on Lachlan's arm, his smile warm and intimate. The timeline was the hardest part to create, a cold record of their betrayal. Each entry was a moment I'd been oblivious, planning our wedding while they were sneaking around. I'd cried as I put it together, my tears blurring the screen, but I didn't stop. I'd considered confronting them privately, screaming at Lachlan in our apartment, or calling Elowen to demand answers, but that felt too small. They'd humiliated me in secret, and I wanted their shame to be public. The engagement party, with its guest list of our closest friends and family, was the perfect stage. Now standing in the aftermath, I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. The gasps and whispers from the guests had been satisfying in the moment, but they didn't erase the pain. Lachlan's mother, Clara, approached me, her face lined with grief. "Sophia, I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "I raised him better than this. I'm so sorry." I nodded, my throat tight. Clara had always been kind, treating me like family, and I hated that she was caught in this mess. My own parents were still nearby, my mother wiping her eyes, my father talking quietly with Jasper. I could see the strain in their faces, the way they were trying to hold it together for me. I wanted to tell them I'd be okay, but the words felt like a lie. I wasn't sure what okay even meant anymore. I slipped my hand into my pocket, feeling the weight of the engagement ring I'd taken off. It was a simple band with a single diamond, chosen because Lachlan knew I preferred understated things. I'd loved it, loved what it stood for. Our commitment, our shared dreams. Now it felt like a cruel joke, a symbol of a promise he'd never intended to keep. I thought about throwing it away or selling it, but neither felt right. Maybe I'd give it back to Lachlan, let him carry the reminder of what he'd destroyed. I looked around the room at the remnants of the party we'd planned so carefully. The centerpieces Elowen had made were still on the tables, their delicate flowers mocking the ugliness of the night. The playlist we'd chosen together was still playing, a love song that now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I thought about Elowen, wondering where she'd gone after Torin dragged her out. Was she crying in her car, alone with her guilt? Or had she run to Lachlan, seeking comfort in the one person she shouldn't? I didn't want to care, but part of me couldn't help it. She'd been my best friend for years, the one who'd stayed up late with me during college finals, who'd driven me to the hospital when I broke my wrist, who'd laughed with me until we were breathless. I remembered a night a few months ago, at her apartment, drinking wine and talking about the wedding. She'd seemed so excited, helping me plan the guest list, suggesting venues, even sketching ideas for my dress. Had she been lying even then? Or had it started later? The questions burned, but I knew I'd never get honest answers. Elowen's tears at the party hadn't seemed fake, but I couldn't trust anything about her anymore. Lachlan's exit replayed in my mind, the way he'd grabbed his jacket and walked out without a backward glance. I wondered what he was feeling. Shame, anger, regret. His apologies had been hollow, a desperate attempt to save face in front of the crowd. I thought about our life together, the apartment we shared, filled with memories of lazy mornings and late-night talks. We'd spent weekends cooking together, arguing over who made better pasta, laughing until our sides hurt. I'd have to move out, start over somewhere new, somewhere that didn't carry the ghost of his betrayal. The thought was overwhelming, but also liberating. I didn't want to live in a place stained by his lies. I imagined him now, maybe sitting in his car, staring at the steering wheel, or worse with Elowen, trying to justify what they'd done. The image made my stomach churn, but I pushed it away. They weren't my problem anymore. My parents walked over, my mother's arm sliding around my waist. "Let's get you home," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the slideshow through the confrontation was gone, leaving me raw and fragile. Leela hugged me tightly, promising to call tomorrow. "You're stronger than anyone I know," she said, her eyes fierce. Jasper offered to help with anything I needed, his voice earnest and a little shaky. I thanked them, grateful for their support, but all I wanted was to be alone, to process the night without eyes on me. My father took my hand, leading me toward the exit, and I let him, feeling like a child again, needing his strength to keep me upright. Outside, the night air was cool, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the venue. The city hummed around us, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded. I climbed into my parents' car, sinking into the back seat, my mother beside me. She didn't say anything, just held my hand, her warmth a lifeline. My father drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road, but I could feel his protectiveness, his quiet anger at Lachlan and Elowen. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, their colors smearing like my thoughts. I thought about the future, about the wedding that would never happen, the friendship that was over, the life I'd have to rebuild from scratch. It felt like climbing a mountain with no path, but I'd survived this night, faced the two people who'd hurt me most, and come out standing. That had to count for something. When we reached my parents' house, I went straight to the guest room, the same one I'd stayed in as a teenager when I needed a break from the world. The familiar quilt on the bed, the faded posters on the walls brought a strange comfort. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the engagement ring from my pocket. It caught the light from the bedside lamp, sparkling like it had on that beach when Lachlan proposed. I remembered how happy I'd been, how certain I was that we were forever. I'd pictured our life together. Kids, a house, holidays with our families. Now that vision was gone, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. I set the ring on the nightstand, not ready to decide its fate. Maybe I'd sell it, or give it back, or tuck it away as a reminder of what I'd overcome. For now, it could wait. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about the people who'd stood by me tonight. My parents, Lila, Jasper, even Clara, who'd been as blindsided as I was. Their support was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. I thought about Lachlan and Elowen, wondering if they were together now, licking their wounds, or if their betrayal had fractured them too. Part of me hoped it had, that they'd turn on each other, but I pushed the thought away. I didn't want to be consumed by bitterness. I wanted to move forward, to find a way to live without the weight of their lies. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of my parents' voices downstairs. I lay there for a moment, letting the reality of the night before sink in. It wasn't a dream, though part of me wished it was. I got up, splashing water on my face, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. I didn't want to see the exhaustion, the pain, etched into my features. Downstairs, my mother was at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes soft with concern. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I shrugged, sitting across from her. "Like I got hit by a truck," I said, managing a small smile. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're gonna get through this," she said. "You're stronger than you know." My father joined us, setting a plate of toast in front of me. "Eat something," he said, his voice gruff but kind. I nibbled at the toast, not really hungry but grateful for the normalcy. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. I thought about what came next. I'd need to move out of the apartment, find a new place, maybe even a new job to escape the memories of Lachlan and Elowen. The thought was daunting, but it also felt like a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. I'd spent so long defining myself as Lachlan's fiancé, Elowen's best friend. Now I had to figure out who Sophia was without them. Over the next few days, I started taking steps. I called a realtor to look for a new apartment, something small and affordable, a place that was mine alone. Lila came over to help me pack, her chatter a welcome distraction as we sorted through my things. She didn't bring up the party, but I could tell she was watching me, ready to listen if I needed to talk. Jasper texted, offering to help me move, and even Clara reached out, apologizing again for Lachlan's actions. I appreciated their support, but I also needed space to process, to grieve the life I'd lost, and start imagining a new one. I didn't hear from Lachlan or Elowen, and I didn't expect to. Part of me wondered if they'd try to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but I was glad they stayed away. Their silence was its own kind of answer, a confirmation that they knew what they'd done was unforgivable. I thought about the party often. The way the room had gone silent when the first slide appeared, the way Lachlan's face had crumpled, Elowen's sobs echoing as she fled. It wasn't the victory I'd imagined, but it was something else, a reclaiming of my truth, my power. I'd expose them, not just for revenge, but to free myself from their lies. And in that freedom, I found a spark of hope, a belief that I could build something new, something better, without them.